So the title of the talk is Coast to Coast Low-Cost Imaging-Based Plant Phenotyping. Coast to coast indeed, because I think yesterday it was one of my longest trips from France to Adelaide. So what year are we? 2018, I think I can say. And I remember that in 2008, first workshop I attended in phenotyping was in Jülich, and at that time most of the solution was inspired by industrial computer vision or even biomedical imaging applied to plant. And it's nice to see now that also the training included some other sources of inspiration, like these low-cost sensors, which are almost everywhere now in this field. Who am I? So it has been said, and I'm also heading a plant imaging research group of this phenotyping facility that we have in Angers. Let me just, in a brief presentation of this, we care about quality and health of horticultural crops. This is something about 200 staff, and we are part of it in the high-throughput phenotyping facility. We care on this facility on two scales, seeds and plantlets, and also we care about host pathogen interactions. The facility includes most imaging systems that are listed here, and we especially have a unique quarantine greenhouse facility which enables to monitor the plant pathogen interactions in secure conditions, and also extremely high throughput imbibition and germination cabinet that we have in this place. To finish with this part, we are part of the EPPN Transnational Access Network, and so if you are interested in this plant pathogen interaction, especially you can contact us to come and do some experiment in our place. So let's be back on the topic. I pick up this triangle from Yuli Schur presentation, phenotyping being the result of environment and genotype, where any meaningful observable from this interaction is defined as a phenotype. Here I will focus on plant phenotyping by imaging, which also includes this pipeline. And actually, if you want to do it low cost, you have to respect a certain number of conditions that we'll describe. But let me just give a motivation of why we want to do it low cost. For, I would say, philosophical reasons, simplicity reasons like the Occam razor, to allow replication worldwidely in the academic research. Also for sake of translational horizons in agriculture, so that solution could indeed come to the end user, and also to avoid a costly green revolution that agriculture has already known in the 70s. And actually, plant phenotyping was called differently in the 90s. It was called precision agriculture. The systems were almost the same, but there were really much higher costs than what we have now with all the sensors that we will see this week. So what is costly in plant phenotyping with images? Actually, any of the elements which are presented in this scheme can make your system higher cost. So I will give some illustration on this. The first thing is the scene, so the plants themselves. Growing plant costs time and money. The smaller they are, the higher your throughput for a given sensor, of course, and the flatter they are, the simpler your acquisition. So on the left, you see a choice of a very flat observation scale, which is some disk which has been extracted on a leaf, and which enable at a certain time scale to monitor the plant pathogen interactions. Second is a way of keeping the leaf very flat, although this tobacco leaf will be 3D, and you make it simpler somehow. From 2D top view, you can also have access to some information, not all of them. And then if you move to a canopy, you keep somehow also the observation scale flat, although, of course, the canopy itself is structured, but you keep it somehow simple from a top view. an illustration of how choosing the scene somehow can make your your system lower cost. So this is something we just presented in the British Machine Vision Conference this year. We were monitoring the growth of seedling under backlight here. Usually it's done with agar gel, which is somehow costly to prepare because you have to take care that the layer is very flat and so on. And we just had the test to use paper, not paper on which you put your seedlings, but a paper which sticks the seedling onto the Petri dish, and that not only make something cheaper in terms of preparation and cost, but also that reduce the seedling joining problem, which is well known when using the agar gel solution. A disadvantage is that it produces a reduced contrast, but actually we designed an algorithm that takes care of this and was presented in this conference. Now, let's go back to this pipeline. Light also can somehow be costly. It costs energy and money, and maybe you can deal with the natural light if you're working in field condition, but there's a lot of variability, so you may use some LEDs. And a couple of years ago, we designed a solution on how to use very limited number of spectral bands to avoid using hyperspectral imaging, which is costly indeed. The technical slide coming gives a detail of this. We consider the selection of band as a Shannon theory illustration, where you have a continuous channel as input, and as output you have discrete channel. And if you maximize the transfer of information of this, you can look for the design of the best filters. This is what we did on some examples shown here. On the top, we have the problem of apple scab, which is a plant disease known to show very low contrast, difficult to be seen even for the human eye. And in the middle, this is wheat, hard and soft wheat seeds. And in the back, this is on the last line, this is the detection of radical and hypocotyl in seedling, which is also a little bit difficult to see. What the usual costly solution would be to use some hyperspectral imaging and then to reduce the number of channels by PCA, PLS, CDR, reduction dimension techniques. Actually, what we do here is we select the best bands from scratch, and with only one channel, only one component, we have similar contrast that we would have with hyperspectral imaging. On optics also, you can have an effect of the distortion, and if you don't pay enough attention to it, maybe the result will be not as good as you would like. However, in some cases, distortion can be good. There was a nice paper from the colleagues in Montpellier a couple of years ago using a fisheye camera to somehow estimate the course of the sun and how much light was actually coming on the plants. So this was actually not good optics, but good for this application. Sensors. So let me give a little bit more details here on sensors. The choice of the sensor can be also costly. Fortunately, we now live in an era, and I think we will have a lot of illustration of this during the days to come here in Adelaide. New sensors work it better, cheaper, faster, smarter. Let's illustrate this. Better technology. Now we have this Raspberry Pi. This will be the next talk, and there will be other ones in the 2 days, which looks like very cheap solution. Actually, they are better than the one we had before because you can transmit information by the Wi-Fi. And 10 years ago, it was a hell of a job to put just a webcam and have the link that goes just after the door of the cabinet to put a laptop and so on. This is really changing the stuff. And this is actually a really serious solution. This is a slide that came up from the workshop of last year from Syngenta company. So even big groups which will have enough money to pay a very expensive camera, they use this kind of solution to monitor the growth of their plants in their systems. Cheaper technologies, we made this comparison some 6 years ago already, comparing some very low-cost LiDAR sensor with higher cost, and illustrating that depending on the question, we could have almost the same quality of the measurement. For instance, segmentation of the top view leaves, or measurement of the angle of orientation of the top leaf along the main axis. Faster hardware prototyping. I like this example. This is from colleagues in Montpellier. On the left, they design a camera to measure the sugar concentration in leaf. And you can imagine all the effort that has been paid to have this electronic made, so a low series, I imagine, and only 1 year after, you could do it with smartphones, only had to do the 3D printing to prevent light from coming on the sensor and developing application, as it was nicely illustrated by Mark before. Faster software prototyping. This is an example for my group. We were among the first to play with the Kinect in 2012. The first version, it took a hell of a job to Yann Chenet, my former PhD student, to handle with the codes, because it was somehow hacked and not completely official when we started playing with this. And we started a new PhD with Salma, and in 1 week she took control of the second version, using all the good libraries that are now available and official somehow for this kind of sensors. Smarter technologies. This is an example of hyperspectral imaging system. The first one that were used in the field were more inspired by, I would say, remote sensing, very heavy, very costly, and now you have systems which are a couple of hundred of grams, 10 kilo euro, and you can embed them on UAVs, small robots, or even under them. This is a new camera that we developed with my new PhD student, Clément. Okay, so now let's move to the image processing part. We had some illustration on using applications. Maybe not all of them are equal in terms of image processing. Some of them can run the process directly on the phone, while some others need to have a connection to the server to be applicable. So these two applications are doing the same, PlantNet on the left, and this is another one from my colleague in Lyon. I can't read the name here, but it's doing the same as leaf segmentation and then recognition of species. Actually, only the one on the right can work in the field when there is no Wi-Fi or internet connection, which can be useful if you work in a really advanced agriculture area where you don't have access to the internet to do the processing. So it's designing the codes so that it can run on the smartphone instead of using the server to do the recognition. Information costs memory, of course, but also you can consider information in terms of informational tasks. In my daily life with interaction with biologists, I have met 3 types of questions. The biologist knows what he's looking for, and then you can do feature design, and all the old school way of doing signal processing and image processing is working correctly. Second situation, the biologist does not know what he's looking for, but he knows that there are some different phenotypes. And this is where you can do supervised machine learning, and there's a lot of illustration of this in the 2 days. And last situation, the biologist does not know anything. Well, maybe that's not the most motivating part for us, but then you need to do some profiling and unsupervised learning, which would say that the time of interaction with the biologist increase as the amount of knowledge and the precision of the target is decreasing somehow. So I will give some illustration on this part and considering the costs that you have in these situations. So just recall that what we call supervised learning, this is a slide from a colleague of Wageningen. Here we have some object database which have been labeled. So you can imagine it's different phenotypes. Here is different objects. Then you will extract some features from them and represent them in a map which can be multidimensional. Then you enter a new image in your database. You extract the same features, features from the same on the same object features, and you will locate them in this map and associate them somehow to the closest points which had been labeled, and then detect the object or associate it to the good class. You can also do some regression techniques. So if you measure quantities that can be continuously moving, some, for instance, ripeness, continuously evolving from 3.2 to 11.3 here, and you associate this with a measure of color, U value here, and if you plot them and then make a fit, you can then interpolate when you enter a new image in the database that corresponding to no already pre-trained image, but in the range of the U value that you add in your training dataset. So I guess that most of you have heard about this kind of revolution, so to say, of the deep learning, which on this supervised machine learning has changed the deal in a way that before the feature selection had to be done by an expert, while now we have a situation where the features, the numbers on which you encode the images, can be automatically guessed, so to say, or learned by the machine itself. So the introduction of such techniques was quite old. It started to be very powerful in 2012 on the usual computer vision techniques and started to be illustrated in 2016 on plants. And I've seen that there was other illustration of this in the meeting. So what are the economical consequences in terms of cost of this deep learning stuff? In the years 2000, when you wanted to develop an image processing application, it would require you something like 1 year of an image processing engineer to develop, taking into account that there was some research development plus interaction with the biologists, so that was something quite long to be done. And since 2016, I would say, with this deep learning stuff, and even maybe speeded up with the development of applications which are more ergonomic for development, such as Keras or PyTorch, you can reduce the development to something like a couple of days. In some points, this is a kind of disagreement with a recent article. This is a point of discussion that we could have with Mark, where there was a kind of estimation of the cost of a plant phenotyping system, and one of the bottleneck was pointed as to be image processing. We see that there is a reduce of the cost of image processing, so the deal may change at some point. However, there are some hidden costs in this supervised machine learning, especially if you use deep learning, you will need some specific computer devices, such as graphical cards that can go from 50 euro to several kilo euros, depending on the time that you are ready to wait during the training phase. Also, and this is the new bottleneck, image annotation. Typically with the company we're working with, they pay one biologist a year just to annotate images and to come back to the agriculture or the other biologists to say, okay, is it good, is it not good, what is the subtle details that I missed, and so on. So 30 to 50 kilo per year if you want to run this in different situations. So how to lower the cost of deep learning? There are actually alternatives to convolutional neural network that we've been testing recently. This one is called scatter transform, and it has some similarities with the deep learning in terms of association of different scales. However, it does not need the costly feed-forward propagation algorithm, so that it needs less data to be trained, and maybe does not require to have GPU to have a decent result. And in some cases, it can give similar results to the CNN. Also, some very recent result that we got in our group is how to reduce the cost of annotation. So usually annotation is done by hand with using the mouse to annotate the data. And we recently tested on how to take benefit of the eye tracking system, which are devices which are able to capture the position of the eye of a human annotator in front of an image. And we shown that there was actually almost no difference of performance when comparing an image annotated from the eye, gazed from a human expert, by comparison with manually annotated images. So there is a gain of 30 to 50 times faster than if you were doing it manually. Another way that we develop to lower the cost of annotation is to use simulated images. We did it for seedling growth, for monitoring the growth of roots in X-ray imaging, and also at the cellular level to identify the position of cells. So we simulate data that looks similar to the one we will have in reality, but are automatically annotated by the computer, so we save the time of annotation somehow, and we can do some experiment by looking at the influence of physical parameters on the quality of images, for instance. Okay, so I almost come to the end. So my main message is that efficient cost of the phenotyping sensors depends really on the question. So I continue to believe that there is room for all of the sensors that has been developed so far, but users have to think of what they really want to do with it, so that they could have the best cost balance, cost efficiency in the end. In this talk, costs were only discussed in terms of sensors prototyping and data analysis for machine learning. However, coast-to-coast phenotyping, I believe, would be something that takes into account the full phenotyping process as an entire pipeline, taking into account how you produce the plant, how you will act on physiologically on the plants, ensure biosecurity, protect the data, provide a solution to a website, and so on. And this is somehow the challenge that we try to achieve with our group in Angers, including, as you can see, funny mathematicians in the middle, and other people that take care of all these elements of the chain. This is it for me. So we may meet on the internet through the new online deep learning course that we developed for Nobias. It's a cost action, and we'll try to make a version available for the plant community soon, and also maybe in Angers in 2020, where we will hold the International Horticulture Conference. You can contact me at this email. We have some PhD and postdoc opportunities, and I thank you for your attention.